England have beaten Germany in a major tournament, and if you're not interested in football, you might be wondering what all the fuss is about. Well, let's examine what all the fuss is about, why so much meaning has become corralled together under this fixture. What does football mean? What are we talking about when we talk about football? And why are these levels of euphoria so incredible?
The picnic tables are laid out neatly in front of the screen at Trafalgar Square. The tension spreads up to Manchester, where fences mark out social distances and England miss an early chance.
A game like this, the England-Germany fixture in particular, somehow threads its way back into my past and connects me to a person that I used to be and evidently still am. Like dormant selves are awakened by the fixture. Rationalism has kind of won the argument about how we see reality, about how we see society. This is an ordered world, resources, science, medicine, all things that are super important, but most of our lives happen in our heads and happen in our hearts. So a Germany-England fixture, there's obviously historical stuff related to conflict, but I think it's deeper and more personal even than that. It connects to a part of you that's to do with individual childhoods, but a kind of the very sense of a shared experience is evoked. Like you can't help but think of Euro 96 and that kind of giddy summer, which for me would like with being a 19-year-old in London, and for obviously for all of the people that feel affected by this will have their own personal experiences. But the idea that we can all somehow hunker down together and hang an emotional experience on one kind of monumental set of ideas, that's what patriotism is about. That's what the idea of a nation is. You know, like coming as it does during this pandemic where there's cynicism and doubt, and I can't see a sort of a solution for us politically without radical new ideas, without the breaking down of institutions. It's sort of amazing to see the power of one of our oldest institutions, nationhood itself. Even though there's so much about football, it is about competition and therefore conflict, adversity and opposition. What excites me about it is the way that it brings people together, the way that it kind of marks a moment in time. Think about the ways that sort of initiatives are conjured up. Let's create a real sense of togetherness. Let's create a real moment. It's very hard to do that politically, but this kind of seems to be happening organically. I know not entirely organically. There is a lot of administration and bureaucracy in arranging a sort of a Europe-wide football tournament, but the emotions that are pulled out, they're ours, they're personally ours. And you run through the moments in your mind. The first World Cup you remember, the sort of glimpse of 1982, just a mascot somewhere. 1986 and Maradona and yellow grainy footage. 1990 and Gary Lineker's expression and Paul Gascoigne crying. All these things, they are lurking dormant in us somehow, and they in themselves are a kind of mythic language. Football, ironically, peculiarly, bizarrely, isn't about football. It's about heart, togetherness, unity. At the end of that game, you know, when the whole crowd were singing like Neil Diamond songs. What is that? That's a collective euphoria. And like Rio Ferdinand and Alan Shearer, the pundits on the BBC where I watched it broadcast, were saying, you know, these are people that have been enclosed. Yeah, literally locked down, quarantined and enclosed because of the conditions around the pandemic. But in this moment, there is a kind of a sense of freedom, a sense of kind of the beauty of chaos, the power of the crowd, the possibilities of coming together. If you say it's just football, that's like saying it's just opera, it's just theatre, it's just religion. Everything on one level is just bits of paper and signs and signifiers and mathematics. There is something that's very powerful and accessible and populist that finds its home and expression in football. There are so many narratives running, it's almost impossible to track them all. Nation, competition, conflict, the optimism about the end of the pandemic, the sort of concerns and doubts about the way things have been handled, mistrust in government, mistrust in power, all suddenly exploding out. That's the point of ceremony, is to mark a moment and to provide the opportunity for dormant and latent energies to be expressed in order to create change, in order to create improvement. The sadness of our time is that we only only do these things in kind of mock environments. We don't do it for reals. We don't do it in a way that you go, actually, why don't we reorganize society on this basis right now? How can we harness and control and tap these feelings? There's no optimism. There's no optimism in the way that we organize politics, but that optimism is present in human beings because you can feel it euphorically ringing out when the crowds, separated though they may be by social distance measures, are singing in sort of glory, triumph, and it's something that is entirely benevolent, not hateful, not about, we've destroyed Germany. Like, you know, leading up to it as well, I read a lot of stuff where people were saying about, like, you know, it's not really a competition because Germany is so much superior in terms of football than England. They don't even regard it as a competition. Well, I don't think that that's true either. I think that you enter into a kind of a consensual illusion around football. Like, let's pretend that this matters, and as you pretend that it does, it begins to. And the more you enter into that sort of ritualized space, the more real it becomes. What I'm saying is, on a personal level, the feelings I felt yesterday were not pretend. What I had to pretend was that it didn't mean something, because suddenly I was 14 again and 19 again and 12 again, and so weird to be watching it sort of basically alone because my family aren't that interested in it, so I'm sort of kind of watching it with a dog and being forced on this journey, and as my chaotic kids like racket around the room moving closer, so I'm actually just sort of sat almost in prayer at the television. And this is after the game is finished, by the way. This is just to sort of absorb the kind of beauty of it. I always love that moment when they show football where they go, and this is what happened here in the studio when they scored, and they sort of show Rio Ferdinand going mad with energy sort of at the crowd, and Gary Lineker and Shearer, all people that have played for the country. Football carries so many stories, both unique and ubiquitous, totally personal and universal, that there's a great power in there that's literally beyond words. And that's why it's so hard to do what I'm trying to do, is sort of hold it in language.
And in a pub in Jack's birthplace, Birmingham, they watch their boy pass it out to Luke Shaw, who crosses, and Raheem does the rest.
Yes! Right, let's get into the spirit of this match and show that I'm a true man of the people. And to acknowledge that, I'm only going to have one violinist playing today. You've totally misjudged the mood of the nation. I find football to be a sport that's best enjoyed with a quartet. I thought it was weird that I was watching it on my own in the front room, nearly crying, but Boris Johnson's got an orchestra involved.
But wait, never count the Germans out. In Berlin, they see Thomas Müller go clean through. He must score. Oh, but he doesn't.
What's so amazing about this news broadcast is it is being rendered entirely like it's being told to bloody idiot children, and trying to sort of harness and manage this energy. Look at all the different ways that people are using this energy, this river of energy. Boris Johnson politically, the news for media agenda, the crowds in the most authentic way that I can sort of identify, by using it to mobilise latent and repressed frustration about, not forget the pandemic, this is deeper than that, it's older than that, it goes right back. Where does football come from? Well, you know, of course you sort of might know the origins of when it was a mad giddy sport played by crowds between villages, booting a pig's bladder between towns. But like sort of our modern conception of it comes from like working men's organisations, steel firms and shipyards. It comes from like how do we physicalise, express and communify, if indeed that is a word, it should be, these feelings, the positive feelings of being us, the negative feelings of being us. Where I found it most beautifully expressed was in the figure of Gareth Southgate, in many ways a very modern manager, in that he's not the fire and brimstone, guts and gusto shouting patriarch, but a kind of modern, gentle, racially, gender, sexually sensitive and kind of awakened man, talking about his own emotions after famously missing a penalty in 1996. And when he spoke about that, spoke about his feelings of shame, is what he's discussing. Like, where does anyone get to publicly talk about shame, redemption, ideas that sort of belong in the Bible or whatever book you go to or don't go to in order to understand who you are? Football is so important, perhaps in part because these ideas aren't expressed safely elsewhere, aren't able to be expressed safely elsewhere. And to see Gareth Southgate say, I'll never be able to make it up to my teammates what happened that day, but at least we can make it up to the nation.
For the teammates that played with me, I can't change that. So that's always going to hurt. But what's lovely is that we've given people another day to remember.
I feel that the utopia we're striving for will come from acknowledging what we've evolved to be, how we evolved to live, and how through civilization we've somewhat lost our way and found ourselves a reflection of ideals that are representative of the interests of a few people rather than the whole. Football is a populist sport. It's known as the beautiful game, the game of the world, for a reason, because it harnesses something very, very powerful. The game itself, the teams, the colours, the pageantries and liveries are just a symbol of a set of very important principles. Togetherness, unity, competition, but also loss, pain, triumph, defeat. Like the victory against Germany exists in a mythic context. Undeniably, somewhat the myths of the wars in Europe of the last century. But even in just strict footballing terms, the World Cup victory, the subsequent semi-final losses, the losses on penalties, the pain is being catharsised in this moment. Football here is sort of operating as a cultural medicine that is more powerful than any vaccine, a cultural medicine that is more powerful than any rhetoric. And for me, there's so much that can be learned from an event like this, from these tournaments. If they could be underwritten not by corporatism, profit, bureaucracy, and again, the interests of the powerful, if it could become a truly popularist endeavour, then I think it could be an important part of a vision of a different future. If clubs were owned by communities, if people felt genuine ownership, the genuine ownership, by the way, that created the sport as we understand it and the modern football clubs as we understand them, if we could return to that spirit, if we could find again that spirit, I think there's much to be hopeful about, much to be optimistic about, buried in this sport and occasionally bursting forth from this sport.
And as if all that wasn't enough for them back in Birmingham and in Cambridgeshire and in Manchester and in Croydon.
In that moment there where you see like a whole nation held together in a moment of joy and triumph after 18 months where a nation's been suspended together in various forms of fear, positive things coming from it. Oh, look, there's a deer in a high street. The skies are bluer. We should appreciate people that are endeavouring for communal goals, the National Health Service or whatever is relevant in your country. To have the cathartic moment that has provided is very, very powerful. And I feel like we need to be reminded of that we focus too often on our differences. Jurgen Klinsmann, who was on the losing side last night, but has spent much of his life as a German football aficionado and practitioner on the side of triumph and victory, was very magnanimous. And even in the losing, there is still a kind of a togetherness and a camaraderie and a respect. Oppose that to the values that are defining our time now. Suspicion, cynicism, fragmentation, doubt. They're having affairs, they're cheating, you can't trust anybody. This is the energy that needs to be brought forth, harnessed. Don't be elitist about that. Don't be a snob about it, because no one's ever changing the world unless the ordinary people that care about these things, and I would include myself in that demographic, are heard and felt, understood, and allowed to be who they are and to express the values that they have, instead of continually being told, no, you're this, you're that, you're this, you've not understood this is what's true now. More focus on judgment, cynicism, fragmentation. Football is, as was famously said, football is not life and death, it's much more important than that. Of course it's more important than that, because it represents things that can't be stated. Life and death, big concepts, but you can state them. What lies beyond the words? What lies in the deep fathoms of emotion that you can see expressed through hysteria and joy and collectivism, brought about simply by 22 people booting a ball about.
Harry Kane nodded one home to make it 2-0. Thank you, England. We'll never forget it.
So forgive me if you happen to be American or Australian or just indifferent to it. I hope I've provided for you some context from a personal perspective and like at least my own opinion of what it means culturally. That somehow this sport is a prism and lens for things that are hard to identify in the same way that art is, that it contains majesty and tragedy and beauty and pain and suffering. It's so powerful, you can't deny it. It's so powerful. There is a grace that is coming through. England 2, Germany 0. Thank you. If you enjoyed that video, God love you, then please like and subscribe and pass it around a little bit. We do read the comments, so please comment. And I've got an important message for you. You know my podcast where I talk to deep, clever folk once a week and do a guided meditation? It's now accessible everywhere in the world. You can listen to it on Apple. Wherever you are, you can get my podcast now. Go over to Apple and look for Under the Skin or Above the Noise and Luminary. That's the network that it's housed on. And as usual, you can subscribe to Luminary wherever you want. There's links in the description. Thank you very much. Saturday, Rome. Could be another video. Despair, loss. Why? After doing that? Why? How does it work? Oh.